talk through the day's top headlines now with Camilla Tominey and Tom Swarbrick. Welcome, both of you.
Good morning.
We have to start with, oh God, if this well of depravity still has a bottom that's a long way down. Russia's deadly attack on the Ukrainian maternity and children's hospital. There are going to show some shots here you might find disturbing. We have been quite careful in what we selected to show you. So Russian jets have bombed the maternity hospital and a children's hospital in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol.
I mean, Mariupol is strategically very important for Putin because it kind of provides that territorial corridor up the east from Crimea, north from the Sea of Azov, which is strategically really important. So that is why it keeps on taking this shelling. The idea of actually choosing to bomb a hospital with pregnant women and children in it is obviously beyond anyone's comprehension.
Can let me just say, though, when you say you choose to, do we think, we were talking about this morning, is there an inhumane disconnect between dropping a bomb and launching heavy artillery if you don't know exactly where it's going to go, if those weapons aren't smart weapons and weren't targeting where they went?
Well, I think President Zelensky thinks it was a targeted attack.
Right.
And equally, the desperation with which Putin has now escalated these air assaults, because let's be honest, the evidence on the ground is that the tanks in that convoy aren't getting anywhere. They're losing morale. They haven't got any rations. It's freezing cold. So the army that he has on the ground have lost a degree of faith. You've then had military mothers in Russia condemning them being sent under false pretences. Effectively, they thought they were there for a military exercise. So if you've lost the battle on the ground, you then take to the skies. So actually, earlier in the week, I was on the show, and perhaps I was being naive in saying that it was a good thing that he has strategically lost that advantage and not planned his troop assault very well. Well, no, because the consequence of that is more desperation when it comes to indiscriminate bombing. But you have to ask yourself, and I'd be interested for Tom's view on this, you know, where now is the UN in all this? Because this is clearly a war crime, and you would want assessors down on the ground to be making an assessment of exactly what's gone on here, because there are rules of war and engagement. It sounds like
you're not following any of them, though. No. There's talk of biological weapons.
Therefore, this is taking this into completely new territory.
Tom, let's bring you in to this now. I mean, you can understand Boris Johnson there described this attack as depraved. We know that 3 people, including a 6-year-old child, have been confirmed dead. I mean, you look at the images coming out of there, the women, the children, the cots and children's beds and toys covered in ash and debris. What is the next step here? Because obviously the world is watching this, and the more these images that we see them, and it's important that we do so to fully understand the extent of what this country's going through.
It's just beyond horrific. And Phil, as you described it there, the deliberate targeting of hospitals and civilians is why it's a war crime, because there's no way in which it is legal, humane. It is plumbing the depths of depravity. And unfortunately, the military experts say this is a tactic. It's not that this was an accident, that, oops, we hit a hospital, or indeed that it was going to be one hospital. The Russian tactic, as was displayed in Syria, is surround a city, allow 2 days for people to leave, consider everybody who hasn't left to be an enemy combatant, and then destroy everything, knock everything out, knock out the centres that you can treat people in, like hospitals, take water offline, take the gas offline, completely surround it, besiege it, and tighten the noose around it. And that is what we are seeing. And that is going to mean some very, very big decisions in the coming days and weeks, if this continues, for NATO about what to do. And as you say, about the UN to secure places like nuclear power plants, or indeed to be on the ground to check for signs of potential war crimes. Well, the government very quietly, sorry, Phil, the government very quietly suggested possibly getting UN forces or troops or somebody into nuclear power plants, but whether that's got any legs, we don't know.
The news conference is obviously being held all the time. There's sort of breaking news. I'm just looking at Sky at the moment. Turkey could have brokered talks. Belarus intervenes on the Chernobyl supply. A notable decrease in Russian air activity, which could be helpful or extremely ominous, because we don't know whether they're regrouping. You know, all of these things. We talk about war crimes, talk about NATO, and it would appear, and we're all watching so much news, probably too much, that it would appear an absolute red line that NATO doesn't cross that border, because if there is, some exchange of fire, then we could be in a world war.
Yes.
It could be a nuclear world
Yes.
war. Everyone's going to be tread very, very carefully, though. But then you hear this morning that there's potential talk of biological weapons, chemical weapons. If he uses chemical weapons, they're heavier than air, then they seep down into the cellars and they seep down into the submarines.
And also these thermobaric weapons, which basically sort of are vacuum bombs that expel the lungs. You know, it's just absolutely barbaric and brutal. But the point is here, the solution that needs to be found, rather than engaging the so-called Allied forces into World War III, is to use some of these diplomatic efforts. You've got pressure on China, on Russia now, extremely uncomfortable from their own diplomatic status with what's going on. Lukashenko in Belarus, well, he's not to be trusted. He's been the subject of UK sanctions, but at the same time, if he can put a protective ring around Chernobyl, obviously that's no bad thing. But this is now going to be about, I think, issuing more threats. What have we had in the UK this morning? Well, we've had them impose sanctions on Abramovich. The notion, by the way, that Chelsea's been sort of taken under state control, that asset has been frozen. He can't move it, he can't sell it, he can't profit from it. And as far as he's concerned, you know, that is a very large black mark on his links to the Kremlin, which have always existed, and yet, you know, people have been shut down, particularly journalistic, from exposing who Putin's people actually are. So that's hugely significant, and the continuation of making Russia an international pariah with the likes of Coca-Cola and McDonald's and all the rest of it pulling out and making life very difficult for Russians is one step there. But I don't know whether what's happened this morning or yesterday and the images that we're seeing are going to slightly change the military offensive on this. Tom?
The calculation for NATO, if Russia uses chemical and biological weapons, is so huge. And I'm afraid we saw it in Syria with the red line that was put down by Obama and others, that if Syria were to use chemical weapons, then that would cross a red line. That was not enforced all those years ago. And the theory goes that emboldens people like Putin to test and test and test where that line is. What does NATO do if a chemical weapon is used? Are we going to bomb chemical weapons targets in Russia? That is an enormous escalation. It's unbelievably worrying, that. The only other glimmer of hope is the diplomatic talks that are taking place. And maybe there is a sign that things are thawing between the Ukrainians and Russians about how to find some conclusion to this, what could be agreed upon to at least bring about a ceasefire, if not a total conclusion. Maybe there's some movement there, because at the moment, I think as we're seeing, it just appears completely hopeless.
One of the big things that are being discussed at the moment, and apparently Priti Patel is due to speak in the House of Commons at 10:30, and that is this extraordinary situation we have on our borders of refugees fleeing war-torn Ukraine, grabbing whatever they can. Sadly, some of them appear not to have been able to bring their childhood vaccination certificates to get into the door. Poland has taken in almost 1.3 million refugees. Germany, 30,000. Slovakia, 153,000. 2,000 people have fled Ukraine and have arrived in Ireland. In the Home Office, the UK has granted visas to 850 Ukrainian refugees under its scheme. It said that 22,000 applications to rejoin the relatives have been started, but there is this application process. God knows how long it takes while these people stand out there in the snow waiting to find out whether they can get in. It looks like it is completely bureaucratically shambolic.
Absolute shambles.
Last night, the Home Office announced the so-called pop-up visa centre in Lille. Officials say that people couldn't travel to Lille there because it's only for people who've been referred by the British Border Force. I was watching on the news yesterday, dozens of Ukrainians trudged to the temporary UK visa centre in Rzeszów in eastern Polish city. Misinformed by a faulty government website that they could turn up without an appointment, turned out that they definitely could not. Is Priti Patel going to put this right at 10:30?
Well, hopefully so. But also, it's not just Priti Patel. The Home Office itself is an absolute basket case.
But she heads it up.
I've written a story about it today. You know, she heads it up. But equally, administratively on the ground, the whole thing has been found wanting. There was no preparation. You can't just start setting up a consulate if you haven't actually prepared and put the staffing into administrating these visas. You've got people who have turned up in Calais being turned back to Paris or Brussels when they've already come thousands of miles. You've got a British appetite, which is very much in favour of just letting people in. Put a number on it, let them in regardless of all of the paperwork. I think there is an appetite for making sure people are being properly processed, but make it as easy as possible rather than tying these people up in red tape.
Are you both able to just stay for a little bit longer? Because what we want to do is we want to try now and tailor the show so that we can get to that common speech if we can. So timing-wise, to get your response from that, that's at 10:30. So if we'll perhaps hold you on this thought. Tom, I know we haven't had your comments on this at the moment, and then we'll reconvene when we get closer to that common speech by Home Secretary, if that's all right.
OK.
All right, thank you.